I'd say we found out who's responsible.
I can do this all day.
Shield tossing is the ranged attack for the warrior, and it's quite overpowered. With the right skills and gear, you can toss that shield between every enemy and practically one-shot the entire arena. Let's go. Let me know what other warrior builds you'd like in the comments down below. We'll start, as we have done with these videos, with the abilities we're using. However, it's really not the focus for this build is these abilities. They are mostly used to either apply effects or get other triggering things happening. But Deadly Ground is the first one that we'll start off with here. Now what Deadly Ground does is it creates that necrotic field on the area that does like tick damage of necrotic over time. But the main reason to use this is the enhanced damage effect that you gain while this is active. And then we're also using Bloody Advance, which is another necrotic skill that's a projectile and duration skill that applies Sundered. Then we can detonate that Sundered effect with Emmerich, and we'll talk more about Emmerich and why we're using him specifically in a little bit. And then I'm also using Reaper to detonate Weakened, which is that specialization skill for the Reaper line itself. Now this will apply Siphoned as well to give you a little bit of health back if you do need it, but it also detonates Weakened, which can be applied by Emmerich as well. But the main kicker here really, and we'll get more in depth for this as well, is it's really all about just shield tossing, right? And increasing the amount of bounces you can get for each like shield toss. So when you toss that shield, it can bounce between enemies. You want to maximize that number as well as the amount of damage that those bounces can do, and leaning into that necrotic damage as well as the necrosis status effect and applying as many stacks of that as you can to whittle down enemies. Now this really does destroy enemies. It's probably the best build that I have done so far or tinkered with, just in terms of the fact that you don't really have to do anything because it's just shield tossing and the cooldown on those tosses are so short, whereas there are other ways to obviously deal significantly large amounts of damage in areas as well, but not in the way that you can just toss this shield and then continually bounce it back and forth with that like shield bouncing ability. And it's fun, it's kind of overpowered, but yeah, let's talk about skills first and then we'll start talking about build with all of the uniques that we are using. There's only a couple that I specifically want to call out, but obviously you want to copy as many of these as you want. The main being the shield volley, which is one of the early ones. You will use this heaps because it keeps that shield toss going to deal damage up to 3 times and being able to continually bounce it. And then as you progress through the line, you're really just going to pick up anything that is in relation to shield toss, whether that be increasing its overall damage, increasing how much bounces you get, and then obviously you want to grab the electric armor as well because that does increase the bounces. It increases that ranged attack damage plus the weak point damage. It is harder to weak point hit enemies with a shield compared to say the arrow of the rogue because you've got to line up those headshots. It is a little bit trickier. It does obviously extend the amount of damage potential you can do significantly, and then you want to advance all the way into the specialization line of the Reaper, grabbing those skills. And the main thing to call out here is when you hit that level 30 and you get to pick either going up or down in this line, you want to go up and grab Perfect Throw first to gain that additional damage. Plus from this line as well, you can then gain an additional necrotic projectile that'll follow and defeat enemies when you kill enemies, and you're going to be killing enemies very regularly with this build, and then let it linger to shield toss bounces now apply on affliction based on your shield's damage type as well. Now because of this like overall setup, initially your shield damage type will be physical, but when you go down into the bottom line with Death's Throw, it'll convert that damage into necrotic damage, so it'll apply necrosis for all of those bounces and hitting on enemies, and it can apply that status effect multiple times. And then the additional effects you get from Living Decay and Desperation, which will also benefit this build as well. The gear for this build, we're leaning into anything that buffs our necrotic damage, like the Dark Shard Sword, which we're probably not going to be using heaps because for the most part, you're just tossing that shield. Now, there is a couple of shield toss shields that you can choose from. I've gone with this one because it does increase the necrotic damage. It does give that extra shield toss bounce. Plus, when charged to maximum, it does apply that necrosis status as well on that first hit. And then once you do make this legendary, you'll get additional damage as well. But there is a couple of other options that you could go with. For the maul, I am just using whatever maul because I've never switched to it for this build because we are just tossing that shield. The helmet, however, this unique is really important. So Mage Bane, what it does is it reduces your rage generation. It converts all of your abilities to now be on a 60-second cooldown and have no rage cost. But for each percentage of rage, like each 2 rage you have, you increase your damage by 1%. Now there is a specific greater passive called Enduring Rage that your rage will no longer decay below 50. So essentially here, this is just giving you, by having this passive and this helmet equipped, a 25% increase to your overall damage. I'm using the Jumper's Def Leathers here for the ranged attack damage, the 25% charge shield toss damage, and the extra defense while charging, because you will be holding that charge for a while to get those extra ticks. And then once this becomes legendary, it does have the chance to just disrupt enemies. For the grenade belt, I am using the necrosis one here because it does give necrotic damage once I do somehow get lucky enough to actually level this up, as I have had terrible luck with leveling up this grenade belt in this run. The amulet is a little up to you here. Like for the rings, I am using the precious decay for all that juicy necrotic damage, and then I'm using the twin palladium for the rage on kill and the rage generation, plus the increase to maximum rage. And then once that does become legendary, it stacks then with the helm piece as well to further increase my overall rage. The runes are up to you, but the one specific one you want to run here is a redouble to instantly gain 100% of your rage. So say if you're fighting a hard enemy or a boss, what have you, and you want to maximize your damage output because of that helm, you can then just pop this. That'll fill up your rage bar, increase your overall damage, charge up that shield toss, sling that baby out, and it will deal a ton of damage. By the way, the unique helm Magebane actually comes from the champion fight in the Hosberg wetlands. After you have beaten that champion, there is a unique chest that's right there that will unlock, and that will give you the Magebane helmet. The best companion pairings for this build really is Emmerich and Lucanus, and there isn't really any other options. Now, mainly because you then hit the trio of having a mage, a warrior, and a rogue, but also because Emmerich and Lucanus both have great synergies with necrotic builds. They can both apply necrotic vulnerability to increase your overall necrotic damage, which is basically all the damage types that we are doing here, as well as having the ability to apply weakened that you can detonate with Reaper, or detonate the sundered effect that you can trigger with a bloody advance. But both of these have great synergies, and I would definitely be running Emmerich and Lucanus and leveling them up as part of your main companion party. Let's give us some general tips for this Reaper spec. As you are leveling out throughout the game, the shield toss build is a little hard to get going because it does require you to have all of those skills in the Reaper line. Until that point, you may want to say run one of the other lines, whether that be Slayer or Champion. Champion is really strong as well. Like there's a lot of great fire damage skills, and just fire damage in general is quite strong because there is a ton of Darkspawn in this game. Now, speaking of that Darkspawn, the Andraste's Will Ring will convert all your affliction damage into burning. And when you're fighting Darkspawn are resistant to necrotic damage, and we're essentially just doing necrotic damage with this build. Just putting on this ring, say replacing the necrotic damage bonus ring we're using, replace that with this for any Darkspawn fights, you will have significantly more success because you can then apply burning rather than necrosis, which will do tons more damage to them, and you can melt through those enemies much quicker. When you're trying to find the right gear for this build, the Veil Ranger and the Mournwatch vendors are absolutely perfect, as the Veil Rangers has a lot of ranged and that weak point damage gear that you'll be able to pick up, and the Mournwatchers vendors have great gear for necrotic builds that you can also grab there. So definitely lean on those two vendors and level them up first. But gear chasing can be a little rough, especially in a build like this where we're not using a ton of uniques, which makes it a little hard to get like specific pieces that you are looking for. It's really just that helm that you need. Otherwise, it's like up to whatever you can find and level up at that various time. But make sure you're checking those vendors, as a lot of them will have those necessary upgrades that you do want. And don't forget about the vendors at the crossroads. There are plenty there as well. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.